Destiny 2. We should preface this. You're writing the review. You've not written it yet. So these are early thoughts. How much have you played? What do you think so far?
Well, I'm at level cap for what that's worth, which isn't much, to be fair. In Destiny, getting to the level cap is sort of the beginning of the grind through, the power loop, right?
And now we can say in Destiny overall, in 1 and 2, that is the constant.
Yeah, I think that they've changed some things about making the early part of the game more sensible and having there be a more even flow from that early part of the game as you're playing through the story and on through to the rest of the experience,
which has been their push since Taken King. It's very much the message of we need to get more people into that juicy endgame content.
Yeah, well, and I think they're approaching it in two different ways. They want more people into that endgame, or what
juicy
they sometimes call the cyclical game, right? But they also want to pull some of the fun stuff from that end game experience back into the core game, the stuff that people experience early on. And I'm interested to hear, both of you guys have played a lot as well. If you sense that, I certainly have things like there are exotics that show up very early on in the game, so you can get that experience of getting one of those really rare armor pieces or weapons. As you're playing through the story, right? That not all of that stuff is pushed to the very end of the game, right? You get a little flavor of that early on, and can begin to understand the excitement of that. Whereas for the previous game, and even for the expansions of the previous game, a lot of those, a lot of the exotics and things like the exotics were set up just for the end game experience, and so you had all these people who were going crazy about collecting exotics, like Andy and I, right, who were really into the game and played a lot, and everybody else was like, I never got an exotic, like,
what is that?
Why do I even care about that, right? And so they've done things to pull some of that back into the core early hours, which is really smart. Yeah,
Reiner, you seem to be tickled by this game so far.
Oh my God, it's beautiful,
just visually
stunning. Yeah, the environment design, the lighting, the score, the music that goes over this. I know they lost their
they lost one of their composers, right? But the other one's still there.
Yeah, and wow, I mean, in terms of just setting the tone, it's remarkable. And their gunplay has always been among the best in the industry. So you combine all these things, it feels great, it sounds great, it looks great. I'm loving it so far.
It's sad that last night I tried to play and I got the, hey, you've been rejected by the servers prompt again and again and again, and I wasn't able to ever start it. But still, I appreciate the hell out of the art, even getting up to that point. Just the menus are so gorgeous, and it has like a nice little touch where it shows, moments from the previous Destiny games that you've played, and it does a journey-esque thing where it lists everyone that you played that with. And I thought that was a little bit hokey when I saw that was a thing, but playing through it last night, surprisingly heartfelt. I'm like, I played that with that Dane guy that I used to play with. Oh, this is when I beat Dark Below with Miller,
Hey, remember when I tried to play with you?
Yeah, it had that memory, too, of just me zipping away in my spaceship so I didn't have to
I
play
saw he was in orbit, so I jumped up behind him. My ship's behind him, and all of a sudden Hanson just disappears.
This is the worst thing that ever happened in Reiner's life. He brings it up constantly. It's a travesty.
Yeah.
But, Suriel, what's the most interesting thing about the game so far that you've encountered?
I think probably the biggest improvement that I've seen is just it feels a lot more expedite. Like the flow of it is a lot faster. So you don't have to go back to the tower every time, or you don't have to hit up like 2 loading screens between each activity. A lot of, sort of, to speak to some of the end game stuff, a lot of it is a lot faster. You don't have to grind as much. Like when you get a cool new weapon, it's already, all of its perks are already unlocked, so you don't have to like, all right, well, now I'm gonna shoot this gun a lot so I can upgrade it. And just getting there, like Miller said, the story is a lot more cohesive, and there's a lot more environmental variety. A couple of set pieces that make it feel like less like, oh, I'm running around in an MMO space just shooting things until I get to the end point. There are specific areas where it's like, okay, this feels like something out of like an actual like shooter.
Well, let's talk about that, because last time we talked about this game on the podcast, Ben Reeves was talking about his time with the campaign, and he compared it to Halo 3's campaign. And now that it's out, I'm wondering if you guys can kind of flesh that out. What do you think he was talking about with that comparison?
I also found myself thinking a little bit about some of Bungie's earlier work as I played through, especially the latter half of this campaign. There's a little bit more of the feel of certain story missions that have that bombastic quality, where it's just like, yeah, you know what? In this sequence, we're just gonna we're throwing balance out the window and we're just going to do this really fun thing for 5 minutes, right? There's this vehicle sequence. It's going to be really fun, and then it's going to be done, and you're going to go back to your core gameplay loop. But that's going to be this really memorable moment.
Yeah.
Right. And even the tone of the storytelling reminded me a little bit of some of that stuff in like Halo 2 and Halo 3.
What does that mean? What's the tone?
It is less self-serious. I think there are parts. There's a segment in that game that feels almost Borderlands-ish, where there's a character that seems very part of, like, I mean, not to spoil too much, but she sets up a lot of jokes, and like there are moments where I'm like, this does not feel like something that would have been in Destiny 1.
I mean, it's a way more playful script than it has been before. Even more so, I would say, than some of their attempts at comedy in like The Taken King,
where it's basically, hey, Cade, you're a one-man show up on stage singing Dance Monkey.
They take advantage of Cade and Cade's voice actor being a funny guy.
Nathan Fillion,
and but it's not just Cade this time. I mean, I think that they go for other places that they can find some humor. There's a balancing act there that that isn't a matter of like good and bad. It's just some choices that have been made. I mean, I think that with that playfulness, there's a little bit less of the sort of mystique that characterized some of Destiny 1, which, to be fair, there were a lot of people who just didn't like that at all.
Did you?
I did like some of that stuff. I think at times it became too self-serious. And as the Destiny writers, I think, have used the term that Destiny 1 had a lot of people with very straight backs.
Right.
And there's less of that here, right? And so they're constantly trying to balance the fact that at its core, the Destiny universe is this sort of rich, optimistic view of this kind of distant fantasy future.
That screams comedy,
right? That inherently has a little bit of a kind of like thee and thou kind of quality to it, even though they don't use those kinds of words.
Like a lot of you think back to the way they name everything, like
right,
everything
the
is
speaker
nice.
and
everything
the
has
darkness.
And there's less of that here. And I think one other thing to point out is that it does a better job of sort of in Destiny 1, you were always coming, okay, why am I doing this? Where they do a much better job of attaching names to faces, of like when you have a quest giver, they are on the screen, they are animating more than they used to.
Well, I mean, they even did that with Taken King, right? With the characters in the corner. But is this like actually
way
running
more
around
than
the
that.
environment?
Yeah, for one, there's more cutscenes.
Sometimes. Okay.
And two, like even in the menus, you'll be constantly like going back to this one quest giver, and they'll feel like more of a character than they did before. And so what that does is I think it establishes, okay, when I'm hearing this voice, I can attach that back to that character. And so that lets them be a little bit more playful of just like setting up, like maybe not setting up, but like establishing context for some of the lighter stuff that they do later on.
Yeah. So just a better story overall. Is that everyone's take here?
Yeah, and it kind of feels like the first chapter. I know that's weird for you guys.
No, I
really
think you
love
are
the first one.
absolutely right, actually.
But it starts with a big disaster, the heroes having their back against the wall and then having to fight back against an evil that they define very well. Like, I think they did a good job of, for people that are going into Destiny for the first time in Destiny 2, that all this makes sense. There isn't all this lore that's carried over that you might not get. They do a good job of having someone talking you through certain things as you're walking to a new area, like, oh, these are these guys. You knew that from the first game, yet they give you that context very quickly. So I think they do a very good job of setting a new table for people to explore and be a part of. I think it is pretty straightforward in terms of sci-fi. I don't think there's a lot of mystery there or really clever things, but I think the worlds that they paint, that you explore, are more interesting than anything is going on with the Axis or the good guys.
Right.
I mean, Reiner speaking to one of the things that I think was a conscious choice that they made that does have a little bit of a loss connected to it, which is that the story makes more sense. There's a more consistent through line from beginning to end. There's a concrete villain that they establish really well, and then they follow through on that with the way that they conclude the game in a way that is, I thought, really awesome. It's a great ending. But there is less of that kind of like hard sci-fi mystery there, at least in what I've played so far.
Yeah.
And I think I can only speak for myself. There's a part of me that misses a little bit of that, but I understand the choice of why they're doing that. I mean, I think part of what went along with that was a lot of people having to scratch their heads and being like, what is going on? What is this stranger person? Why are they doing stuff? Who is she? Where did she go? I don't know.
And you think maybe that can be like relegated then to item descriptions, and then
maybe,
with all due affection, the Destiny nerds can get something out of just like some creepier, more subtle endgame.
I don't know
content.
if they're going to go for that though.
I don't know
that's
either.
the big question. I don't know if they're trying to keep it really simple in kind of that Star Wars context where maybe they could build off backstories eventually, but it seems like everything that's in the game now is very straightforward.
Right.
Huh.
I think they did make, like Miller said, a conscious effort to sort of fill in gaps with personality, whereas Destiny 1 felt like it had a lot of open spaces for like, you're just out here kind of like in space, and there was sort of like Miller said, like a mystique to that where you could sort of inject some of like your own interpretation into what was going, not like from a story bent.
Like the Queen and her brother, right? Like those were characters that always had a certain like what's going on there? What is their relationship?
She's one that sits in a chair, right?
Right.
Okay.
Like what is happening there? And as much as that was a frustrating thing because it was kind of confusing and not super clear, it was also it also had a kind of grandness to it, a grandeur to it that
allowed you to sort of be like be imaginative and like like filling in these spaces. And like I know that's kind of like sounds like a bit of a cop out. I was like, they didn't really put much here, but it does feel different to have this game be so in your face of like, here is the tone we are establishing.
It's so weird to criticize Destiny for being so straightforward and clear. I never thought we'd reach that day.
I don't think that's a criticism.
It's not. No, I think that universal
change.
Right.
Yeah.
It is a good. I think making it more sort of like straightforward story, I think, is a good thing. But we are, I think it is more about like it feels different.
Yeah.
In a way that I'm
not bad, but different.
So
it feels different.
It's focused, Miller, but as again, I cannot stress this enough for viewers. Miller is a lore fanatic with Destiny. You know more. You are in the top 1% of knowledge of Destiny, and I know you're humble, but I'm going to insist that that's true. Does it advance the larger picture at all, or is it just a focused little story of, hey, here's this one bad cabal, all right, put a bullet in his head, move on?
This Reiner used the phrase that this game feels like the beginning of the story, and I want to come back to that to answer your question. The Destiny 2 very much feels like if the previous game was an introduction to a universe, Destiny 2 is the beginning of the story they want to tell in that universe.
Right.
Interesting.
I think
it's a story about Luke Smith, for instance, made a big deal about the fact that they did not use the word the darkness in this game at all.
It's creative director, by the way. But
and they don't, right?
Even when you die, or like when you go into those areas,
exactly. That now says that your light fades away. So the darkness is entirely the darkness is largely absent from this game because thematically this is a game about light. From the moment you turn on the first menu screen and it's bright white, this is a game about what is light, what does it mean to be a guardian, and what is light both as a physical thing, like in how it manifests in the world and what you can do with it, but what does it mean sort of philosophically, right? What does it mean to like as a sci-fi concept, what does the light represent thematically about our world, right? Like, and it's about hope. It's about things that you cling to and self-sacrifice and a willingness to do the right thing. They circle back to these very basic concepts, sometimes explicitly through the script, where the ghost will say something like, there've got to be other guardians like us who are just trying to do the right thing, right? And it's just almost kind of a throwaway line, but it speaks to what this game is supposed to be about. So that I'm very, very, very confident I can say that Destiny 3 will be about the darkness.
Yeah.
Oh,
that'll be like The Empire Strikes Back, right?
Yeah.
Like if that's their middle chapter. I mean, it's weird to say that the third one would be the second chapter, but that's really what it feels like they're setting up.
With Destiny 1's development and some reboots along the way, maybe it's like now we have our sure footing. But it's weird that you guys say this is the optimistic one, because I've only played the beta. in that campaign. It's like, hey, the tower's crumbling down, the city's on fire,
Well,
you've lost everything.
It ends with something very, very bad. I don't want to spoil what happens next. It's a very cool moment after the beta. Like the next sequence going down a hill is very cool.
Okay.
But yeah, it establishes all the things Miller just talked about with light and that being kind of the driving force in this story. And I think they do a really good job of setting that as kind of the primary. It's almost a MacGuffin in a way, like kind of what you're seeking out at the beginning, but it really works. I think it clicks with what they're trying to say here.
Story aside, how's the rest of the features in this game? Have you had time to check out multiplayer, strikes, everything's feeling okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all working through it in different paths, right? That's the part of the joy of that game is that, you know, everybody sort of plays through the experience of the story at some point, but then you divert into the things that are interesting to you. I think, Suriel, you probably finished the story really fast. You finished before I did. And I think I was diverting maybe a little bit more into some of the Crucible stuff early on, and I still haven't done a lot of the Strike stuff yet, which I'm excited to dig into here in the next couple of days. There's an abundance of content to begin exploring once you finish the story. Yeah. And there's also I want to be really careful about talking around it because there is an aspect of how the game concludes its story that that almost sets like in a much more substantial way than they've ever done before, sets up like, okay, now there's another game here.
Yeah. They do a much better job of saying, okay, the game ended, you got a good conclusion of the story, but please like make sure to not stop playing because there's all this other stuff you can do.
This sounds like Nier Automata's ending.
They have a way of
we've clear pathway.
They have a way of introducing that next phase of the Destiny 2 experience in a way that is really meaningful and powerful and fun, and it cries out to keep you going into the game, which is of course what their point was, right? Like they desperately want a broader segment of their player base to experience what the hardcore people really like about this game, which is that beyond playing through a fun little cinematic story, there's this wealth of stuff to dig into that can be really rewarding.
Yeah.
And the worlds feel so much bigger, yet the path through them is a lot shorter. It's really weird, weird thing to say, where they don't give you the Sparrow at the beginning. Like you don't have your speeder bike, but landing on the planet and getting to your mission point is very quick.
But the world's bigger.
It just feels gargantuan. Like when you go into some of these areas, it's like you almost feel like, to bring up Halo again, like, oh man, are we going to have like tons of vehicles coming into this area? Because it is a huge clearing with a far sight line. Like they could really set something up here.
But a lot of the environments are like really expansive. There's like a Vex outpost that just has like this gorgeous art, like that combines with their architecture really well. One of them is just one of the moons on Titan is just this series of oil rigs that are just interconnected, and there's just storms constantly.
But you're watching these big waves roll in, and you know you're going to get way out there. But they do a really good job of kind of leading you along and having really nice set piece moments, even if it is just a firefight, where it's like, okay, we're on this new bridge, and all of a sudden there's like 30, enemies that come pouring out at you.
And you're talking about in the campaign. This is like patrols and stuff.
Okay. Yeah, gotcha. And it feels like that moment in Star Wars where the Empire is boarding the frigate for the first time, and the door comes down, and it's just an exchange of laser blasts. That's what most of the firefights feel like in this. It's just chaotic, but focused, right? Like it could be a huge world, but the focus is very narrow again. Like they do a really good job of doing that, and accommodating a co-op as well, making those firefights expand when you have other players there.
I think the firefights in general, speaking further to what Reiner was introducing there, just feel more frantic across the board.
Harder.
Maybe a little bit harder. It's always tricky because they're balancing for anywhere between 1 and 3 players coming into it. But when you're playing it through solo, a lot of the fights feel the way that I found myself thinking that like almost every fight felt like one of the last fights from a previous Destiny game or a previous Destiny expansion.
There are more do or die moments.
Yeah, there's a lot more times where there's like, holy cow, there's like 15 guys all coming at me, and they're coming at me from 3 different sides, and I really got to constantly be moving. But you have more tools at your disposal to succeed. You've got your new like class abilities and the way you can optimize your subclass now to do cool stuff means that you have the tools at your disposal to be successful there if you use everything you've got.
Yeah.
One of the things I will say is that there are new enemies, but it feels like the encounter designs is different, but sort of the enemies you're fighting still feel similar. Like there are snipers, there are people with shields, even though like,
I mean, there's no new races or anything, right?
Right. There's some new enemies. Like there's a Cabal enemy with like a huge sort of like shield that is more circular, but it has a weak point, so you just shoot.
Even that though is a variation.
Yeah,
right. Of an old
alien dogs, though. I remember from the
there's a couple.
And like the missions don't like what you are actually doing in the missions doesn't feel like super different. There's Miller didn't encounter this, but there's one mission where enemies had shields that I couldn't shoot through, like no matter what, with like they had silver shields that I couldn't do anything about. And so there's a trick to beating them. And you have to engage in something specific to get these enemies to make them vulnerable, which feels like something like I don't want to say like raid encounter-ish, but it feels very different from what we've done before. But that's really the only exception to, hey, there are guys coming at you and like you shoot them. Like there's not like that big of a variety in terms of that. But I because of the encounter, like they changed up the way they approach you and some of the environments. It did feel sort of like new.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I am still very curious about, I mean, we're all pretty effusive about this game after the first couple days because it does a lot of things right. The thing I'm reserving judgment about a little bit until I play more is the actual progression loop, and in particular how some of that stuff ties together with consumables, which seems like a weird thing to have to bring up. Except it right now is one of the notable problems that I see in the game, and how it ties together with the Endgame loop is going to be really interesting.
What type of consumables are we talking about?
Well, so they have a this new microtransaction model, which is as aggressive as they have been with that stuff in any of the installments. And that
towards the end of Destiny 1, they kind of ramped it up a bit. Yeah,
they moved in that direction, and they've continued to move in that direction. And right now, if I have to make a call about how I feel about it, it's that it makes me kind of sad.
Yeah,
it feels like they have acquiesced to needs to bring in more money there in a way that feels like it's hurt the game design. Most specifically in consumable shaders and mods, which sounds like a really just bad idea to me. And I really worry about how it's going to affect a lot of what I had fun with in Destiny 1.
Mm-hmm.
In the long term was kind of about like, I mean, for lack of a better way of describing it, the dress-up game, right? Like playing with your doll.
They call them dolls at Bungie.
Yeah, I mean, playing with your doll in the late game and being able to be like, okay, I have this awesome shader that I got 3 months ago, and I'm going to put this on and see what it looks like with this new armor set. Everything now related to that is a consumable thing. And most of them come through the packs that you get through the microtransactions. Now, you do earn, and this is part of what I was going to say that I'm not ready to pass judgment on it yet. You do earn once you hit level 20, each time you level again, right? They've always had that you continue leveling and you'd get some sort of minor reward, motes of light or whatever.
Yeah,
sort of like an Overwatch loot box system where when you level up, you get a chest, but you can also just buy those chests.
Right. So now you get those bright engrams, they are called, by leveling, right? Yeah. But you get one every level, and it takes a good while. You know, it takes probably for a lot of people it'd be like an evening of play that you would get one of these things, and maybe that is generous enough that it'll feel okay. But even if it does, I think their actual mechanic for putting on those shaders and using these consumable mods doesn't help the game any. I think it makes the game worse. So
it's not necessarily pay to win in terms of gameplay, but they're really stripping the fun and the thrill out of just customization aesthetically.
It's that like you get these shaders, you use them on one piece of your armor, and then that shader is used up. So if you only have 3 shaders, that means you don't get to have your full armor set look the way you want it to.
And that was part of the appeal of like all these armor pieces look different, but if you use a shader, they all look like they look like a uniform.
Yeah.
And this, because you only get like 3 or whatever instead for your however many, like I think 4 for armor and 3 for weapons, that appeal is, you know, lost.
So negative gut reaction, but you're just curious to see, like, months down the road what this economy is going to be like?
I'm curious about that, and I'm also curious about the broader progression loop in the end game. One of the advantages of the way they've set up progression right now is it is very logical. It's very simple. Honestly, it doesn't even bear explanation. It's so straightforward. Previously in Destiny, there was always these conversations where, like, you would come up to me when you hadn't played in a while and be like, okay, so what do I need to do so I can level up my, what is it, my light?
When I had 45 minutes to kill,
yeah. Okay, how do I, I'm probably just not going to play Destiny. Like that, right?
More or less, yeah.
Okay, so now it's very much like you play, you get better. Like if you have your character and they get rewards, it doesn't matter what you're wearing. New stuff decrypts that will improve your character. And
go do something. It all funnels up into the same sort of loop, and you'll get something out of whatever you end up doing.
Right. So it's all very logical, and I on the surface I really like the system. I am very curious though if it has the longer life that it needs. And that's not. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying I don't know yet.
Yeah.
I think sometimes with simplicity, there's a danger of oversimplification, right? Where it's something just becomes like, well, all right, well, I just did that, and now I'm as good as I can make my character be, and now it's done, and I don't have anything else to do. So I guess I'll go play a different game. And that's not good either. So I'm hopeful that now that I'm beginning to explore some of that cyclical game that happens after the story concludes, that there'll be some meat on that bone.
Yeah. And so get ready to chew on that bone with Miller's review, which is going to be coming out whenever Miller puts in another 300 hours into Destiny 2.
It's going to be a little while yet. The raid's still not out, and we want to play the raid.
That's next week,
you're going to
right?
wait for that.
Yeah. That's next week?
It is next week.
Exciting.
And, you know, I think with a game like Destiny, it is important that we spend some time not just with a single character, but with the other characters, because there is so much about, because these characters are playing against each other in a, you know, competitive experience. It's important. The balance question is a really important one to discuss and evaluate. So it's going to be a little bit yet, but
so like December 1st, come back to GameInformer.com. You'll read one of the most thoughtful reviews
but it
possible.
Won't be December
about
1st either. So I think, and in the meantime, you know, Suriel and Reiner and some of the other guys have been doing lots of cool stuff on the site that you can see talking about Destiny 2.
Yeah, we did a live stream showing off the microtransactions if you're curious about exactly what that looks like in game. Suriel's showing off some of the Endgame stuff. We have a video up, all that fun jazz.
Yeah, for me, I think it's one of the best games of the year so far.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's in
that,
it's in that discussion. So,
okay.
I mean,
Jesus. All right.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I know we're getting into the nitty gritty and kind of losing that bigger focus, but it is really like well done, well-made game. They thought about how to make every aspect of the game better outside of maybe the microtransactions. We'll see, but
almost everything.
I've been having a blast, you know, playing it with friends and just admiring the awe that goes into some of these sights and sounds in the game. It's cool.
That art team, unbelievable.
There are a lot of people, I think I can safely say, even at the place that I'm at, there are people who did not like Destiny 1 who are going to, if they give it a chance, are going to really like Destiny 2.
I think JV in the office was saying that this morning. He's turned around on it. Thank you so much for watching this excerpt from the Game Informer Show podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version and listen to new episodes airing every Thursday. We cover big games on the horizon, games that we've just reviewed. We have long-form developer interviews, a lot of fun stuff. So check it out every Thursday.